Welcome, I'm Terry Christensen, and this is Valley Politics, the first episode of our fourth season. Today we'll talk about philanthropy in Silicon Valley with Alexa Cortes Culwell, co-author of The Giving Code. We'll ask Alexa whether high-tech firms give enough locally, or are they as stingy as some people say. Then Ruth Silver Taube will brief us on the work of the Santa Clara County Wage Theft Coalition. And we'll close our show with the fourth and final part of our interview with former San Jose Mayor Tom McEnery. In this segment, Tom talks about a local controversy about a statue that predates what's been going on in a lot of southern cities lately. All this next on Valley Politics. Welcome everyone, and welcome Alexa Cortes Culwell. You're with Open Impact. Tell us what is Open Impact?
Open Impact is a strategic advisory firm. We consult to donors who are looking to create social impact and to social impact leaders, people who are actually on the ground making those changes happen.
And what brought you to this line of work?
Oh boy, well, I went to UC Berkeley and dreamed of kind of being a change maker, and right out of college, began to just work in the sector and led two private foundations, first for Charles Schwab and his family, and then for another high net worth family, and then began to advise families who come into extraordinary wealth to really think about what impact they can have with that wealth.
That sounds like a pretty good gig.
It's a good gig.
Yeah?
I love it. Well, I love that capital that might sit in bank accounts or savings accounts needs to get out there and create impact. So,
and now you consult more broadly, not just with families, but with foundations and corporations.
Yes.
And
yes.
Well, that's really what we want to talk about, because you co-authored something called The Giving Code. It's available online. I really recommend it to anybody interested in philanthropy specific to Silicon Valley. And that's what we want to talk about. But you begin by talking about the prosperity paradox. What is that, and what's that got to do with giving in the Valley?
Yeah,
prosperity paradox.
Like you, I've lived here a long time. I'm raising my family here. I have kids in schools here, and I've noticed a huge shift. And it was kind of a perception at first. It just seemed like everything, all the costs were rising. Fancier cars were on 280.
Yeah.
People seemed to be getting richer. I wasn't sure what that was all about. And so we wanted to just look at the data, because concurrently in my work life, I'm advising philanthropists and nonprofit leaders. And I was seeing a lot of disconnects in terms of what nonprofit leaders were telling me about increases in demand for their service and being cash strapped. And so we began to look at this paradox and really quantify and qualify the wealth and the poverty and inequality in Silicon Valley. And it's pretty staggering, and it's unconscionable, actually. Because if you think about it, for the first time we were able to identify there's 76,000 millionaires and billionaires in San Mateo and Santa Clara counties alone.
Not counting housing.
Not counting your house. So that's investable assets of $1 million.
Investable assets.
Assets of $1 million or more, not including the cost of your home.
Yeah.
5 million millionaires, 12,000 people with investable assets of 5 million or more. So pretty staggering how much wealth there is just in these two counties. That doesn't include San Francisco. The number's almost double when you include San Francisco. So you're looking at that. You're looking at an economy that's an economic engine in the world. We compete with nation states in terms of the amount we produce in the economy, right? And then we began to dig into what is happening with the people being left behind. We know there's people being left behind, but we wanted to know how many. And so we have 2.6 million people in these two counties, and 800,000.
San Mateo and Santa Clara counties.
Yes. And 800,000 of them rely on some form of public or private assistance to get by. So that's
a third of the population.
A third of the population. And then if you look at our poverty statistics, they hover around 30% in both counties, plus or minus. And there's a real decrease in the middle class. So year on year, we were seeing 10, 11% decreases in the middle class. And those people are our new working poor. What's interesting about Silicon Valley is people work here, regardless of who they are. The poor here work many jobs. So this isn't about people who are unemployed. They're about people who are working many jobs to get by and are relying on public and private assistance. When we interviewed the food bank, and we feature a case study about them in our report, they told us that the demand for their services is higher than at the peak of the recession in 2008 and 9.
Right now.
Yeah, and even today, driving here, there was a new report from the food bank that they're increasing unprecedented demand. So they're going to be looking at having to serve even more people, raise more money, set up more logistics and operations. And the people who are accessing that are kind of everyday people just trying to get by here.
So there's huge need, and thousands of nonprofits in the Valley trying to address that need. But the word among them is they're not getting much money from the wealthy people you're talking about and from tech companies. Is that true? Are those companies and the wealthy people you're talking about not giving a lot locally?
So we decided to look at the level and growth in philanthropy over the last 10 years. And what was fascinating is in every kind of what we called asset class, philanthropy was rising. We're actually quite generous here in the Valley. Our individual giving, we outpace our peers in the state and nationally. In the last year of data that we had, people in these two counties gave nearly $5 billion. Our private foundations are growing. We've had a nearly double in growth of the establishment of those. We've seen corporate giving rebound from kind of right around the recession. That's rebounded, and that's increasing as well, although that data is a little harder to come by. So we're seeing this incredible growth. So the question really is where is the money going?
Yeah.
And is it making its way to what we call community-based organizations? Those are nonprofits that serve local needs and local residents. Because if you have such a growing kind of group of people who are being left behind, kind of who are the groups who are serving them? There are community-based organizations.
So they're homeless shelters, food banks, programs for the mentally ill.
After-school programs for low-income children,
Very
providing
important.
kind of supports to help them succeed in school. All those kinds of organizations, really kind of the core, of what makes kind of our social contract work, right?
Well, it helps people get by.
Helps people get by. So we gathered 140 nonprofit leaders of those organizations, and we asked them what's happening. And what they told us was a pretty perilous story. They are facing increased demand. 80% of those nonprofits said their demand is higher than it was in previous years. They have wait lists for services, and they're not seeing the upside of the growing wealth in philanthropy. So when we looked at that data, it ends up that the majority of money being given away in this region leaves the region. And about the 10% that stays, it depends on what data set you look at.
90% plus leaves the region. So there's a lot of giving, but it's not coming locally.
So it's leaving to go to people's alma maters, to go to national and international causes, all worthy things, most likely.
Yeah.
But this 10% that stays, then the majority of that stays is going to large institutions. It's going to universities and research and things that are not community-based organizations, or to nonprofits that operate larger missions outside the region. Again, not a bad thing. But what's left is a tiny little piece for these nonprofits who are struggling. And when we did a larger survey, we not only did qualitative research with leaders of nonprofits, we actually then fielded a survey. We just kept hearing over and over again, we're not growing our budgets in that way. In fact, 30% of our nonprofits are operating in deficit, which is significantly higher than the national average. So our nonprofits financially fare worse here. Almost 50% of them are operating with less than 3 months cash in hand.
Wow.
And if you're, Create TV, for example, you're a nonprofit, you know how important cash is.
We know.
As do private companies, right? Our for-profit companies, cash is a really important issue. You have to have enough cash to operate, and you have to have many months of cash on hand, even a year or more, in order to have kind of a healthy model for your organization. So our community-based organizations who are serving these vulnerable populations themselves are fragile. They're being displaced, they're having to compete for talent, they're having to compete for housing for their employees can't afford to live here. So they're losing talent to companies for higher wages. They're losing talent to other parts of the state and country because they can't afford to live here. So they're really kind of caught in a perfect storm, and yet they're needed more than ever.
Yeah. You know, there's sort of a parallel in politics, in political giving. So the tech companies, the big wealth in the Valley gives a lot of money to presidential campaigns, very little to local candidates. There are a couple of exceptions, Ro Khanna, Sam Liccardo. They give to transit tax measures for a few of those things. But otherwise, it's really hard for local candidates to do fundraising beyond their own base. Thinking about those companies again, are there exceptions to the rule?
Oh,
I think
there's always
companies
exceptions, right? You don't want to generalize too much because
Yeah.
you do leave out the people who deserve some recognition for what they do. So the Sobrato organization, one of the largest real estate development
very
companies,
generous.
they've been voted the highest giver locally year after year after year. And they run the Sobrato Family Foundation, as you know, and so they're a privately held real estate development company, and they give so much to the community. Applied Materials. You know, Google and Facebook are increasing what they're doing locally. They're beginning to really understand the need to do that, and then of course some of the spin-off wealth, right? So the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, which is created with Facebook wealth, is really putting a lot of effort into local issues and looking at how they can be of help. They've given, you know, a real outsized commitment to our public education system and trying to help that. They're looking at housing issues. So there's always kind of exceptions, but you want more. The other interesting trend we saw with corporations was kind of almost like a disproportionate focus on funding STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. Again, a really important issue, right?
Really important.
Funding STEM in our public schools. But we found that in looking for kind of strategic alignment with their corporate products and mission, everybody was kind of doing a lot around STEM, and so lots of other things get left out. These are really hard issues because, again, none of it's bad. It's just that you want more. You know, we need to kind of grow the overall pie for local. When we interviewed over 100 ultra-high net worth individuals to ask them about this, about why they were sending their money outside their region, many of them hadn't really thought of it that way. We actually did an exercise where we asked them to draw a pie and to allocate, kind of capture for us visually how they allocate their philanthropy every year, and people had never really thought of it. So it's not necessarily intentional, which was very interesting. And when we asked them what were the barriers to giving locally, they told some really there were lots of patterns and interesting stories that emerged. For example, people said that they were just overwhelmed by the number of nonprofits. They didn't know how to assess all these different groups doing what they perceived as very similar things. They didn't know how to assess the cost for one being one number and the cost for another maybe being higher, but they essentially do the same thing. So how do they evaluate the two? How do they know whose results are better? And are those even the right questions to be asking, right? So they also just kind of expressed a bit of confusion about how big the issues were. They don't really kind of drive or work or socialize in parts in these pockets of poverty where they get to actually see what's really happening. And so there was really kind of a lack of understanding of the depth of the entrenched poverty here and where it sits and how it actually kind of, you know, it diminishes the quality of life for us all when we have so many people, almost 1 in 3 who are struggling. You know, that's not good for the health of our community overall. And so we need to begin to think about that and how it affects all of our lives, and also what's the right thing to do for this group that's being left behind.
I think you're getting a little into the topic of my next question, which really is the title of the study you co-authored, The Giving Code. What's the Giving Code?
So the Giving Code is something kind of interesting that emerged as we were talking to these ultra high net worth individuals. They would talk about kind of the code they use. It was kind of an implicit code for giving money away, especially when they give it to community-based organizations. They would talk about the need for metrics and the need for accountability and transparency. They wanted to be engaged and connected to these nonprofits. They didn't, and they also kind of had a portfolio mindset. They have lots of different accounts by which they give away their money. They're holding disproportionate amounts of donor advised fund money, for example, and we can talk about that if you're interested. But it was like there was this code, but then when we talked to the nonprofit leaders, they would say, well, we never talk explicitly with donors about this code, and this code isn't really actually what drives community impact. But nobody really ever tells them that. So they have kind of a way they give. They think it's going to create change, but the two sides aren't connecting or listening to each other very well. And in fact, this code isn't sufficient. It needs to kind of be rewritten. It needs to be kind of unearthed. We need to talk about it more explicitly, and we need to have a conversation about when you do give money to community-based organizations, what kind of capital, the way you give it, can be given in a way that actually is transformative, that actually helps that organization drive change. But sometimes donors have kind of mindsets that and frameworks in their head that really aren't applicable in this case. So that's a hard truth to kind of talk to a donor who's writing you a check, or you're trying to convince them to give you money. Nonprofit leaders will often just take the check with its constraints and maybe not have the honest conversation about what it really takes. So the giving code is really about unearthing this code and hopefully having the conversation to kind of begin rewriting it. And that's what we're doing as we're promoting this report. So we're talking to a lot of donors, trying to help them understand what they can do to be more effective in their giving.
It seems like the big gap is that most of the nonprofits are doing really kind of maintenance services for people who need. And the donors that you're talking about, the tech donors especially, are more interested in innovative programs that will be transformative change. But you can't really do transformative change until you can feed people and give them shelter. So how's it going with this conversation? Are you making progress with the donors?
It's kind of a both and, right? So we talk to philanthropists and donors about a portfolio approach. We say you've got to do both. So think about your allocation. Think about kind of helping stop and triaging some of the really terrible things happening right now. People need to be housed tonight. They need to be fed today. Children need to go to school with a meal tomorrow while we're working on the deeper systems level solutions. So maybe think about how much would you allocate to those kinds of programs, which are just basic kind of humanitarian kind of giving. And then what might you allocate to more strategic, deeper looks at kind of the systemic issues? And where could you plug into conversations about that? So we've also talked a lot about how institutional foundations with professional staff can begin opening their doors and inviting these donors in to share with them what they know and kind of lead them to some really interesting things they can be funding. But we basically say construct a portfolio.
Well, this is incredibly important work. Thank you for what you're doing. I really recommend the report to everybody. So Alexa Cortes Culwell, thanks for being with us today. Thanks for this work.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Next, Ruth Silver Taube will brief us on the work of the Santa Clara County Wage Theft Coalition. Then we present the final segment of our interview with former San Jose Mayor Tom McEnery.
My name is Ruth Silver Taube. I'm the supervising attorney of the Workers' Rights Clinic at the Catherine and George Alexander Community Law Center at Santa Clara University School of Law, coordinator of the Santa Clara County Wage Theft Coalition, legal services chair of the South Bay Coalition to End Human Trafficking, and a founding member of the Bay Area Equal Pay Collaborative. Wage theft is the crime of stealing earned wages from workers. It occurs when a worker is paid less than minimum wage, is not paid overtime, is paid only in tips, or works off the clock. Wage theft is a national epidemic affecting workers in industries that span the economy. Wage theft hurts workers, their families, their communities, and responsible businesses. Despite the economic success of Silicon Valley, wage theft is rampant in Santa Clara County. The San Jose office of the California Labor Commissioner handles approximately 300 enforcement claims from workers in the county each month. Current enforcement efforts are proving insufficient to confront the epidemic. That's why the Santa Clara County Wage Theft Coalition was formed. The Santa Clara County Wage Theft Coalition actively works to end wage theft, defend workers' rights, and enforce wage theft judgments. We hope to accomplish this through policy advocacy, community organizing and outreach, direct action, education, leadership development, and resource coordination. We work with affected workers and their families, particularly low-wage workers who have been victims of the crime of wage theft. We've also successfully advocated for a wage theft policy and ordinance in the city of San Jose. Local governments have a role to play in combating wage theft because we must disincentivize the wage theft business model.
Well, let's get to the statue, because that was an issue relating to minority concerns, and statues are in the news right now. So this was the Thomas Fallon statue, which stands quite near our studios here at Create TV. What was that about?
Essentially it was about a history program that was going to involve a San Jose history through the Native American, Spanish, Mexican, Californian, and American period. We had a group of teachers that had sat down, some of the foremost historians that you knew well, Leonard McKay, Clyde Arbuckle, that had a program, because history is very important to me. I see history as something to unite, to inspire people, and to learn lessons from. Even the best and the brightest can learn lessons from history. And it's important to learn those lessons well. So getting that program in place was really important to what I wanted to do in my last years as mayor. It hit a pretty big stumbling block with the erection of the Fallon statue. My daughter actually did a documentary that was on PBS. Did you ever see that?
No.
You've got to catch up on some of your PBS stuff, and it was in a couple film festivals. I'll just give you the tagline. How can raising the American flag be controversial in America? We know what flags are very controversial. We see them all the time, and quite recently. How can raising the flag, when the majority of people in San Jose felt fairly positive about that in 1846? I think it's kind of summarized by one council member in the midst of the controversy when Captain Fallon, who maybe had some warts like many of the founders of our nation had, and many current people in office also have, that it was pretty clear that they didn't understand the history. One council member asked me, well, when they raised the flag here in downtown San Jose, how many people here were killed? I said, actually, that's pretty easy to estimate because it was zero.
Yeah.
Because Fallon, who raised the flag, was married into the Castro family. I guess you can say his kids were the beginning of the assimilation of what we had in San Jose then and what really e pluribus unum is. But it was so twisted in the alarmist and so misunderstood by people that should have known a little bit more about history, that when they were comparing him to quote unquote Hitler and Stalin, it found a ready audience. I thought if we just let it go and gave it to a historical commission to set up some more statues, we had statues to each of the periods that were going to go there. The Native American, they're on the bridge over on San Fernando Street. We never got to the Spanish period. We never got to the Mexican period. Fallon finally came out of the Witness Assistance Program. Incidentally,
The statue was put into storage for a while after the controversy.
It cost $400,000, which is almost more than the statue. But there was such a misunderstanding about history there that, it offended me, but I thought we could move forward and then move forward with the other parts of the history program. They all died with that, so that was a great disappointment. And I think, as you'll note, every piece of art now, and some of them I kind of like, but they're all Tinker Toys and toy animals and stuff. And if that's the best we can do to honor history in San Jose, it's kind of a sad ending. So
Well, let me
that
ask
was
you
not
about
good.
another historical moment. So you ran for Congress in 1994. When you left office as mayor, your popularity rating was 60+%. According to the Mercury News poll, you ran for Congress in 1994 and lost to Zoe Lofgren, who's still there. What do you think happened in that election? And are you sorry now that you didn't have a career in Congress?
Well, the first part of that's pretty easy. She had more votes.
Oh, okay.
The second part is I'm very surprised at you as a historian that you haven't done your research better.
Yes.
Do you really think I would have stayed in Congress for 20 years?
No, I really don't.
No, I think at that juncture, I'd finished being mayor. I'd been able to teach at Santa Clara. With my academic record, I was a presidential fellow there, which is pretty extraordinary. Thank God that academic record wasn't analyzed. And I taught at Stanford for a while. And there was just a window of time. We had a wonderful person in Congress for many years, Don Edwards, who you knew. I thought I had some things to say about cities and about political reform. Political reform, who you haven't mentioned. Term limits I supported, even for myself. A lot of people support them after they're out of office for other people. Revolving doors, gifts. I laugh in not a pleasant way that they have a discussion now at the City Council whether to have $400 or $200. We had a simpler rule. No gifts, period. You're not in there to get gifts from people. And if you get gifts, they should be from family members and close friends who you've known for about 30 years, not people who you met in office. So there was a lot of reforms, including the types of things we talked about, and I've continued to push for. Term limits, incredibly important. I really think we'd have a better system of government, more consistent with the founders of the country, if people didn't think that they were absolutely irreplaceable. Even in some of my most buoyant days, I never thought I was irreplaceable. I had an old aunt in Ireland that I kind of got into this type of discussion with, and she looked at me and said, "Tommy, there's a lot of irreplaceable people in the cemetery." And I think more people in elective office ought to understand that a little bit.
Well, Tom, we're almost out of time, but tell us what's next for you. What's the next project?
Just continue a little bit writing. Running the small businesses down. San Pedro Square Market is a source of great satisfaction to me.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
Took a long time, but it got there.
What do they say? The Hollywood actor who finally got the Academy Award. He's overnight success in 40 years. So. We did the Peralta Adobe in 1975-76, and the San Pedro Square Market opened around it in 2011. So, Terry, you're a historian too. You look at the long scope of history. I like to think it bends toward good things, and hopefully that'll be continuing what we see in San Jose.
We'll be back next month with an all-new show. Meanwhile, you can catch up on previous shows on our website at createtvsj.org. or on YouTube by searching for Create TV San Jose. And you can let us know what you think about our show and suggest future topics or guests by email at valleypolitics@createtvsj.org, on Twitter at valley_politics, and by following us on Facebook. And now that's all, folks. Thanks for watching Valley Politics today. See you next time.